Story. Chapter 1. A Life of Quiet Contentment. The sizzle of bacon punctuated the low murmur of morning news in the kitchen. David Harding stood at the stove, his calloused hands expertly flipping the rashers as he listened to the market report. At 38, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had built his life from scratch. His modest bungalow on the outskirts of the city wasn't luxurious, but it was his, earned through years of honest labor and careful saving. "Finn, breakfast's ready," he called out, sliding the crispy bacon onto a plate lined with paper towels. The sound of teenage footsteps dragging across the floor answered him. Finn, 17 and perpetually plugged into his headphones, slumped into his chair at the kitchen table. His sharp features, inherited from his mother Eleanor, were set in their usual mask of teenage indifference. David placed a plate in front of him, watching as the boy barely acknowledged the gesture. "Got any projects coming up at school?" David asked, trying once again to bridge the gap between them. "The workshop's free if you need to build anything." Finn shrugged, not bothering to remove his headphones. "Nah, I'm good." Eleanor breezed into the kitchen, phone already in hand, her perfectly manicured nails tapping away at the screen. At 36, she carried herself with the practiced grace of someone who had grown up in comfort, unlike David's working-class background. "Coffee ready?" she asked, not looking up from her phone. "Fresh pot," David replied, pouring her a cup and adding the precise amount of cream she preferred. "Want me to drive you to work today? They're doing road work on your usual route." "I'll manage," Eleanor replied curtly, taking the coffee and moving to gather her things. David watched her, noting how she seemed to glide through their kitchen as if it were beneath her. It hadn't always been like this. When they first met, Eleanor had been different. Or perhaps he had been too blinded by love to see the truth. She had come to him wounded from her first marriage to Finn's father, seeking stability after years of chaos. David had offered her that stability, along with his unwavering devotion and a home for her son. "I made you lunch," David said, holding out a paper bag. "That little deli you like was having a special on their Italian sub." Eleanor took the bag with a distracted nod. "Thanks. Don't wait up tonight. I have that client meeting that might run late." David nodded, though something in her tone made his construction foreman's instincts prickle. He learned to trust those instincts over 20 years in the business. They had saved him from countless workplace accidents and warned him of unreliable contractors. Now they were telling him something was off in his own home. The morning continued its well-worn routine. David cleaned up the breakfast dishes while Eleanor finished her preparations for work. Finn remained absorbed in his phone, occasionally picking at his food. The silence between them felt heavy, loaded with unspoken tensions. "Finn," David tried again, "I could teach you some basics about construction this weekend. Might come in handy someday." "Why would I need to know about construction?" Finn muttered, finally pulling one earbud out. "I'm going to college next year, not working some manual labor job." The word stung, but David kept his expression neutral. He'd grown up in a small rural town where manual labor was honest work, not something to be looked down upon. He'd left at 18 with nothing but a high school diploma and a determination to succeed. Now he ran his own crew, earned a solid living, and had never once missed a mortgage payment. "Education's important," David agreed, his voice steady. "But knowing how things work, how to build and fix them, that's valuable no matter what you do in life." Eleanor glanced at her watch. "We should go, Finn. I'll drop you at school." David watched as they gathered their things, noting how they moved in sync with each other, leaving him feeling like an outsider in his own kitchen. As they headed for the door, Eleanor paused. "David, can you transfer some money to the joint account? I need to pick up a few things." "Sure," he replied, though he made a mental note to check the account later. "How much do you need?" "Oh, just a couple thousand," she said casually. "The usual." David's jaw tightened imperceptibly. The usual had been getting larger lately, but he'd always provided whatever Eleanor asked for. It was a point of pride for him, being able to give his family financial security. As the door closed behind them, David stood in his kitchen, listening to the silence. 20 years of construction work had taught him to read the signs of structural weakness, to spot hairline cracks before they became catastrophic failures. Now those same instincts were screaming at him that something was wrong in the foundation of his marriage. He moved through his morning routine, checking his tools, loading his truck, reviewing the day's work orders. But his mind kept returning to the subtle signs he'd been ignoring. Eleanor's late nights, her increasing demands for money, the way she barely looked at him anymore. At the construction site, David threw himself into his work. He directed his crew with the authority that came from years of experience, checking measurements, inspecting materials, ensuring everything was up to code. His men respected him. They knew he'd done every job on the site himself at some point in his career. "Hey boss, Mike," one of his younger workers, called out. "Got a minute? Not sure about this support beam placement." David welcomed the distraction, walking over to examine the issue. This was what he was good at: solving problems, fixing things, making sure structures were sound. If only personal relationships could be engineered. As the day wore on, David found himself checking his phone more often than usual. Eleanor hadn't responded to his lunchtime text, not uncommon lately, but it bothered him more today. He tried to focus on work, on the concrete reality of the construction site, but his instincts wouldn't let him rest. At 3 o'clock, he received a notification from his bank. A large transfer had been made from their joint account, much larger than the couple thousand Eleanor had mentioned. David stared at the number, feeling something cold settle in his stomach. He called Eleanor's office. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harding," her secretary said. "Eleanor left early today. She said she had an appointment." David thanked her and hung up. He stood for a moment, looking out over his construction site. He'd built his life the same way he built his projects, carefully, methodically, with attention to every detail. Now he could feel it all starting to crumble. "Take over for the rest of the day," he told his foreman. "I need to handle something personal." The drive home was a blur of thoughts and memories. David recalled the first time he met Eleanor, at a local coffee shop. She'd been recently divorced, struggling to make ends meet with a young son. David had been drawn to her strength, her determination to build a better life. He'd wanted to help her achieve that. The empty house that greeted him felt wrong. David moved through the rooms, noting signs he should have seen earlier. Missing photographs, empty drawers, gaps in Eleanor's closet. In the kitchen, a single sheet of paper lay on the table. The note, written in Eleanor's precise handwriting, was brief but devastating. "Your weekend dad's status expires today. I'm taking the kids to live with my college sweetheart." Below it, in different handwriting, "We just share your surname, not blood. Enjoy your empty house, ATM machine." David read the words 3 times, each time feeling them cut deeper. His hands, which had never trembled on a construction site, shook now. The betrayal wasn't just Eleanor's. It was Finn's too, the boy he'd tried to raise as his own. His phone rang. Eleanor's name flashed on the screen. "Where's the password for the savings account?" she demanded without preamble. David's grip tightened on the phone. When he spoke, his voice was controlled, dangerous. "Why? Don't be difficult, David. You know I need access to those funds. Like you needed access to the joint account?" His voice was quiet now, but with an edge that would have made his construction crew step back. "How much did you take, Eleanor? Don't act surprised. Did you really think I was happy playing house with a construction worker? Thomas can give me the life I deserve." Thomas, her college sweetheart. The name triggered a memory, Eleanor mentioning him with that wistful tone she used when talking about her life before David. All the late nights, the business meetings, the expensive purchases, they clicked into place like pieces of a blueprint, revealing a structure's fatal flaw. "The savings account stays locked," David said, his voice flat. "Goodbye, Eleanor." He ended the call and sat in his kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of his shattered life. The hurt was there, deep and raw, but something else was rising to take its place. A cold, calculating anger that made his previous frustrations seem trivial. David stood and walked to his home office. He opened his safe, checking the documents inside: property deeds, insurance policies, investment records. Eleanor had taken much, but not everything. He still had his skills, his reputation, his resources. Most importantly, he had his determination. The same force that had driven him from his poor rural beginnings to success. He pulled out a fresh notebook and began to write, documenting dates, amounts, patterns of behavior. If Eleanor and her lover wanted to play games with his life, he would show them what happened when you crossed a man who built things for a living. He knew how to lay foundations, but he also knew how to tear them down. The quiet rage that filled him now was different from any anger he'd felt before. This wasn't the hot fury of a betrayed husband. It was the cold, precise anger of a man planning demolition. Eleanor, Thomas, even Finn, they had all made their choices. Now they would learn that every choice had consequences, and David Harding was going to make sure those consequences were severe. Chapter 2. The Bomb Drops. The construction site hummed with activity as David directed his crew through their tasks. His voice carried the same authority it always had. His instructions remained clear and precise, but something had changed in him. His workers noticed it, a new intensity in his gaze, a harder edge to his commands. "Watch that support beam," he called out to a young worker who was rushing his measurements. "One mistake there and the whole structure fails." The worker nodded nervously, double-checking his work. David's reputation for precision had always commanded respect, but now there was something else in his demeanor that demanded absolute compliance. As the day progressed, David threw himself into physical labor, working alongside his crew with a focus that bordered on obsession. The familiar rhythm of construction work helped him maintain his composure, even as his mind processed the magnitude of Eleanor's betrayal. "Hey boss," Mike approached him during their lunch break. "You okay? You seem different today." David wiped the sweat from his forehead, his calloused hands steady. "Just focused on the job, Mike. Sometimes life throws you surprises, and you have to adapt." The younger man nodded, though his expression showed concern. David had always been a mentor figure to his crew, teaching them not just about construction but about life. Today, he was teaching them a different lesson: how to maintain control when your world was crumbling. The drive home felt longer than usual. David's truck, usually a comfortable space filled with plans for upcoming projects, now seemed too quiet. He pulled into his driveway, noting how Eleanor's car was missing from its usual spot. The absence felt like a physical thing, a void where his family life used to be. Inside, the house was silent. David moved through the rooms, his construction foreman's eye cataloging the signs of Eleanor's departure. Empty spaces on shelves where family photos had stood. Gaps in the closet where her designer clothes had hung. The bathroom counter stripped of her expensive cosmetics. In the kitchen, he found himself staring at the note again. The words hadn't changed, but their impact had deepened. His phone buzzed, another call from Eleanor. "David." Her voice held a note of irritation. "Stop being stubborn about the savings account. I need that money." "For what, Eleanor?" "For Thomas." His voice was controlled, dangerous. "How long have you been planning this?" "Don't act like you didn't see this coming," she snapped. "You and your simple life, your construction work, your modest plans. I needed more. More than a home, more than stability, more than a man who treated you and your son like family." "Family?" Eleanor laughed, the sound harsh. "You were convenient, David. A steady provider while I figured out what I really wanted. Thomas can give me the life I deserve." David's free hand clenched into a fist, but his voice remained steady. "And what about Finn? Did you think about what this would do to him?" "Finn's fine. He understands that we deserve better than this. This working-class existence you're so proud of." The conversation continued, each word revealing more about Eleanor's true nature. David listened, letting her talk, gathering information even as his anger grew colder, more focused. "I want access to the savings account," Eleanor demanded again. "You owe me that much." "I owe you." David's voice was quiet now, deadly quiet. "Let me be clear, Eleanor. You've taken enough. The savings account stays locked. Anything else you want, you can get from your college sweetheart." He ended the call and sat at his kitchen table, his mind working with the same precision he used to plan construction projects. He pulled out his laptop and began checking his accounts. The joint account had been drained, a substantial sum missing. Eleanor had timed her move well, waiting until after his latest project payment had been deposited. David opened a new spreadsheet and began documenting everything: dates, amounts, patterns. His construction work had taught him the importance of detailed records. Now he would use that same meticulous approach to understand the full scope of Eleanor's betrayal. A text message lit up his phone, Finn's name on the screen. For a moment, hope flickered, but the message quickly extinguished it. Mom says you're being difficult about the money. Just give her what she wants and leave us alone. You're not my real dad anyway. David stared at the message, feeling something break inside him. He had tried to be a father to Finn, had loved him as his own. Now those years of care and attention were being thrown back in his face with teenage cruelty. He got up and walked to his garage, where his tools hung in perfect order on the wall. Each one had its place, its purpose. He had built his life with these tools, created something from nothing. Now he would use that same determination, that same precision, to deal with those who had betrayed him. The next several hours were spent making calls and sending emails. He contacted his bank, freezing accounts and documenting the unauthorized withdrawals. He reached out to his lawyer, a man he had helped through a difficult construction dispute years ago. He began gathering information about Thomas, using contacts he had developed over years in the construction industry. As night fell, David sat in his empty house, planning his next moves. Eleanor and Thomas thought they had won, thought they had successfully used him and discarded him. They were about to learn how badly they had miscalculated. His phone buzzed again. Another demand from Eleanor, another entitled request for money. David ignored it, focusing instead on his laptop screen where he was compiling a detailed dossier on Thomas's business dealings. In construction, you learn to spot weak points in a structure. Now he would find the weak points in their lives and exploit them. The hurt was still there, a deep ache in his chest, but it was being transformed into something else, a cold, implacable determination to make them pay for their betrayal. They had taken his trust, his love, his money, thinking he would simply accept it. They were about to discover the difference between David Harding the provider and David Harding the destroyer. Chapter 3. The Quiet Rage. Days blurred together as David maintained his routine. He arrived at work early, stayed late, drove his crew harder than ever. His workers noticed the change in him. Gone was the easygoing boss who told jokes during lunch breaks. In his place was a man of few words and intense focus. Mr. Harding, Sarah, his site secretary, approached him cautiously one morning. There's been another call from Mrs. Harding's lawyer. Tell them what you told them before, David replied, not looking up from his blueprints. All communication goes through our legal team now. Sarah nodded and retreated. She had worked with David long enough to recognize when he didn't want to be disturbed. The construction site continued its usual buzz of activity around him as he immersed himself in work. During lunch break, Mike approached him again. Boss, some of us are getting drinks after work. You should join us. David looked up from his paperwork, his expression unreadable. Thanks, Mike, but I have matters to handle. The younger man hesitated. Listen, we all heard about what happened. If you need anything, what I need, David cut him off, his voice low and controlled, is to focus on work. The Anderson project deadline is coming up. Back at his empty house that evening, David sat at his dining room table with his laptop open. He had spent hours researching, documenting every detail he could find about Thomas. The man's social media presence painted a picture of wealth and success, luxury cars, expensive suits, high-end real estate deals. But David had been in business long enough to know that appearances could be deceiving. His phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. The lawyers say you're being uncooperative. Stop making this difficult. David ignored the message, focusing instead on his screen. He had found Thomas's business website, filled with glossy photos of upscale properties and glowing testimonials. But buried in online forums and local business records, he found whispers of dissatisfied clients and questionable deals. He opened a new document and began typing, organizing the information. 20 years in construction had taught him the importance of proper documentation. Every complaint, every rumor, every suspicious transaction, he recorded them all, building a comprehensive picture of his wife's lover. The doorbell rang, interrupting his research. David opened it to find his friend Jack, a detective he had met years ago during a construction site theft investigation. Thought you might want some company, Jack said, holding up a six-pack. And maybe some information. David let him in, clearing space at the table. What did you find? Your wife's new boyfriend? Jack pulled out a folder. He's got quite a history. Multiple complaints filed against his real estate business, though nothing ever stuck. He knows how to work the system. David listened intently as Jack detailed Thomas's past dealings, the pattern of charming investors, making big promises, and somehow always coming out ahead while others lost money. It confirmed what his own research had suggested. There's more, Jack continued. Eleanor's been planning this for a while. Bank records show she's been moving small amounts of money into a separate account for months. David's jaw tightened, but his voice remained steady. Show me. They spent the next hour going through financial records. Eleanor had been careful, never taking enough at once to raise suspicions. But the total amount was substantial. You want me to file charges? Jack asked. David shook his head. Not yet. I need to understand the full picture first. After Jack left, David returned to his research with renewed focus. Eleanor and Thomas thought they had orchestrated the perfect exit strategy. They had no idea they were dealing with a man who had spent his life learning how to build things up and tear them down. He pulled up his bank statements, studying the pattern of withdrawals. Eleanor had grown bolder in recent months, taking larger amounts. He remembered her excuses, home improvements, Finn's college fund, investment opportunities. All lies, carefully constructed to mask her true intentions. His phone lit up with another message, this time from Finn. Mom says to stop being petty about the money. It's not like you earned it doing anything important. The words stung, but David didn't respond. Instead, he opened a new document and began typing out everything he remembered about Eleanor's past, her failed businesses, her spending habits, her social connections. Like a construction project, he would build his response piece by piece. The night deepened as David continued his work. His dining room table became a command center, covered in papers and notes. He was no longer the betrayed husband reacting in anger. He was a man with a plan, gathering the tools he would need. The house's silence no longer bothered him. It had become his ally, allowing him to focus completely on his task. Eleanor and Thomas had made a critical mistake. They had assumed his strength lay in his ability to provide. They were about to learn that his real power came from his capacity to plan, to build, and when necessary, to destroy. As he finally prepared for bed, David looked at the family photo still hanging in the hallway. Eleanor's smile now seemed calculating, while Finn's disinterest was painfully obvious. He took the photo down, adding it to his growing file of evidence. They had chosen their path, thinking him too simple, too straightforward to react with anything but hurt and acceptance. They would learn just how wrong they were. For now, David would continue his quiet documentation, building his case piece by piece. The rage inside him had transformed into something colder, more focused. He didn't need emotional outbursts or dramatic confrontations. He had learned long ago that the most devastating responses required patience, planning, and precision. The first act of their betrayal was complete. Now David would begin writing his own chapter in this story, and it would be one that neither Eleanor nor Thomas would ever forget. Chapter 4. Laying the Foundation. The leather chair creaked as Randall leaned back in his office, studying David with sharp eyes. The lawyer's desk was covered in neat stacks of papers, documentation of Eleanor's financial activities that David had compiled. You understand what you're asking? Randall's gruff voice carried a note of concern. This isn't just about divorce proceedings anymore. David met his friend's gaze. I'm not looking for a divorce settlement. I want them to learn what happens when you betray someone's trust. Randall nodded slowly, picking up one of the documents. Thomas has quite the reputation in real estate. High-end deals, exclusive properties. But there's always been whispers about his methods. Tell me more, David said, his voice carrying the same authority he used on construction sites. He's careful, keeps everything looking legitimate on paper. But he's got a gambling problem he keeps hidden from his wealthy clients. And some of his development deals. Let's just say the numbers don't add up. David absorbed the information, his expression unchanging. What about legal angles? There are always loopholes, Randall replied, pulling out a fresh legal pad. Ways to apply pressure without leaving fingerprints. But David, this path you're considering, once you start down it, I've already started, David cut him off. The moment Eleanor and Finn walked out that door, they chose this path. I'm just going to show them where it leads. The lawyer studied his friend. He had known David for years, had seen him build his construction business through honest work and determination. The man sitting before him now was different, harder, colder. I'll help you, Randall finally said. But we do this my way. Smart, legal, untraceable. David nodded. I have time. And resources. You'll need both. First step, we need to document everything. Build a foundation that can't be traced back to you. For the next several hours, they worked through David's evidence. Bank statements showing Eleanor's systematic draining of accounts. Records of her previous failed businesses. Documentation of Thomas's real estate dealings. Your construction contacts could be useful, Randall mused, especially with Thomas's development projects. A whisper here about cutting corners. A concern there about safety regulations. I know people who inspect buildings, David replied. Professional people who take their jobs seriously. Randall smiled grimly. Perfect. Now, about Eleanor's social circle. David's phone buzzed. Another text from Eleanor demanding access to the savings account. He silenced it without reading the message. She's getting desperate, he noted. Good, Randall replied. Desperate people make mistakes. Speaking of which, I've got some interesting information about Thomas's gambling habits. The afternoon sun had faded by the time David left Randall's office, his briefcase heavy with documents and plans. He drove to his gym, maintaining the routine he had established since Eleanor's departure. The physical exertion helped clear his mind, allowed him to focus on the steps ahead. Between sets, he observed the other patrons, noting how they carried themselves, how they interacted. He had become more observant since the betrayal, studying people's patterns and behaviors. His phone lit up with a message from Mike at the construction site. Boss, there's talk about one of Thomas's development projects. Some concerns about the foundation work. David typed back. Send me the details. At home, he sat at his dining room table, now converted into a command center. Multiple notebooks contained his observations and plans. He had started tracking Eleanor and Thomas's movements, learning their routines. A notification popped up on his laptop, one of Thomas's social media posts showing him at a high-stakes poker game. David saved the image, adding it to his growing file. Each piece of information was a weapon, waiting to be deployed at the right moment. He opened his journal, recording the day's developments. The writing helped organize his thoughts, kept him focused on his goal. This wasn't about quick revenge. It was about systematic destruction. Another text from Eleanor. David, please. We need to talk about the accounts. He started typing a response, then deleted it. Silence was more effective than words. Let her worry. Let her imagine what he might be planning. David stood and walked to his window, looking out at the quiet street. Somewhere out there, Eleanor and Thomas thought they were building their new life together. They had no idea that the foundation was already cracking beneath them. His phone rang, a contact from the building inspection department. Mr. Harding? About that development project you inquired about? David smiled, a cold expression that never reached his eyes. Tell me everything. Chapter 5. The Noose Tightens. The mahogany conference table reflected Thomas's increasingly agitated expression as he faced his investors. David watched through the glass walls of the downtown office building's conference room, positioned discreetly in the lobby below. He had timed his visit to the building's coffee shop perfectly. What do you mean, pulling out? Thomas's voice carried through the lobby as he followed two men in expensive suits toward the elevator. The development is sound. Those rumors about safety violations are completely unfounded. The investors exchanged glances. We've seen the inspection reports, Thomas. And there are other concerns. Other concerns? Thomas's carefully maintained facade cracked slightly. What concerns? Your personal financial situation, for one. The older investor replied coldly. We can't risk association with someone who has gambling debts. David sipped his coffee, watching Thomas's face pale. The whispers he had carefully planted were bearing fruit. Back at his construction site, David maintained his usual routine, directing his crew with practiced efficiency. But his phone regularly buzzed with updates from his network of contacts. Thomas just lost another major client. Read a text from Randall. His reputation in the real estate circle is taking hits. David typed back, keep monitoring. What about Eleanor? Her social circle is shrinking. Amazing how quickly people distance themselves when they learn about betrayal and theft. The construction foreman allowed himself a small smile as he pocketed his phone. He had been particularly careful with Eleanor's downfall, ensuring each revelation about her past came from seemingly unconnected sources. His crew noticed his improved mood. Looking better, boss, Mike commented during lunch break. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Just focusing on what matters, David replied, reviewing project blueprints. That evening, he received an unexpected call from one of Eleanor's former friends. David? I think you should know. Eleanor's not doing well. Thomas's temper. It's becoming an issue. Really? David kept his voice neutral, interested but not overly concerned. They're fighting constantly. About money, about his gambling. She tried to access some of his accounts, and he completely lost it. David thanked her for the information, then made a call to Randall. Time to move on those credit reports. The next morning, Eleanor's past financial troubles became public knowledge in her social circle. Unpaid debts, failed businesses, the money she had taken from David. It all came to light through seemingly natural channels. David's phone rang, Eleanor's number. He let it go to voicemail, then played the message. David, please. Things with Thomas. It's not what I thought. We need to talk. He deleted the message without responding. Let her stew in the consequences of her choices. At his construction site, David received another update from his network. Thomas had been seen at an underground gambling den, betting heavily and losing badly. His desperation was showing. Sir? A young worker approached hesitantly. There's someone here to see you. Says his name is Thomas. David straightened, his expression hardening. Tell him I'm not available. From his office window, he watched Thomas pace in the parking lot, his designer suit now looking rumpled, his confident demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Want me to call security, boss? Mike asked. No need, David replied. He'll leave soon enough. True to his prediction, Thomas eventually gave up and drove away in his luxury car, one of the few status symbols he still maintained. David spent the evening updating his files, tracking the steady dismantling of his targets' lives. Eleanor's social isolation was nearly complete. Thomas's business was hemorrhaging clients. Their carefully constructed world was crumbling piece by piece. His phone lit up with a text from Finn. Mom and Thomas had another fight. He threw things. She's crying. David read the message twice but didn't respond. Finn had made his choice. Let him witness the consequences. Later that night, David received another call from his contact in the building inspection department. That development project of Thomas's? We're shutting it down pending a full investigation. The violations are too serious to ignore. Thank you for your diligence, David replied professionally. Safety should always come first. He ended the call and leaned back in his chair, satisfaction coursing through him. The noose was tightening, and his targets were beginning to choke. Chapter 6. The trap is set. The city planning office buzzed with activity as David walked through, nodding to familiar faces. His reputation in the construction industry opened doors, gave him access to information others might miss. Did you hear about the Preston development project? One inspector asked him quietly. Complete disaster. Safety violations everywhere. Thomas Carlton's project? David feigned mild interest. Shame. He had quite the reputation. At his right, the inspector snorted. Between the violations and the rumors about his gambling. Well, let's just say his investors are running scared. David absorbed the information, adding it to his mental catalog of Thomas's downfall. The trap he had set was working perfectly, each piece falling into place. Back at his office, he received a visit from Jack, his detective friend. Got something interesting, Jack said, dropping a file on David's desk. Thomas tried to access some restricted accounts last night. Desperate for cash. How desperate? Enough to make mistakes. Big ones. Jack leaned forward. He's looking at serious charges if this gets out. David nodded slowly. Make sure it does. Through the proper channels, of course. Already on it. Oh, And Eleanor? She's been making some interesting calls. Tell me. Trying to contact her old social circle. Nobody's taking her calls. Amazing how quick people turn when they learn someone's true nature. David's phone buzzed. Another message from Eleanor. David, please. We need to talk. Thomas isn't who I thought he was. He showed the message to Jack, who shook his head. They never are they? Later that day, David received a call from one of his construction contacts. Remember those structural concerns you mentioned about the Preston development? We found more. Much more. Document everything, David instructed. Buy the book. The trap was nearly complete. Thomas's world was collapsing around him, his reputation in tatters, his finances in ruins. Eleanor's social standing had been systematically destroyed, her past exposed, her future uncertain. David sat in his office, reviewing the latest reports. His revenge wasn't just about causing pain. It was about destroying their entire sense of self, stripping away their arrogance and self-righteousness. His phone rang again. Randall this time. David, you need to see this. Thomas just tried something desperate. Really desperate. I'm listening. Try to forge some documents. Get access to restricted funds. It's amateur hour stuff. He's panicking. David smiled coldly. Make sure the right people know about it. Already done. His license is as good as gone. The pieces were all in place now. David had created a web of destruction so subtle, so seemingly natural, that neither Thomas nor Eleanor could point to any single cause of their downfall. He opened his laptop, checking the latest social media updates. Thomas's last post showed him still trying to maintain his wealthy image, but the comments told a different story. Whispers about his gambling, questions about his business practices, doubts about his integrity. Eleanor's accounts had gone quiet. Her last post, weeks ago, had been filled with emojis and exclamation points about her new life with Thomas. Now there was only silence. David closed the laptop and stood, walking to his office window. Below, his construction site hummed with activity, honest work being done by honest men. He had built his life on that foundation, while Thomas and Eleanor had built theirs on lies and betrayal. The trap was set. All that remained was to watch it spring shut. His phone buzzed one final time. A message from his contact at the city planning office. Investigation reports are going public tomorrow. It's worse than we thought. David typed back a simple response. Good. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of the end for Thomas and Eleanor. Their carefully constructed world would shatter completely, and David would watch it happen from a safe distance, knowing that he had orchestrated every moment of their destruction. He picked up his hard hat and headed down to the construction site. There was work to be done, and David Harding had always believed in doing things right. Whether building or destroying, he left nothing to chance. Chapter 7. The Downfall Begins. Thomas Carlton stared at the notice on his desk, his manicured hands shaking. The City Planning Commission had suspended all work on his development project pending investigation. His phone wouldn't stop ringing. Investors demanding answers, creditors calling in loans. Mr. Carlton? His secretary's voice crackled through the intercom. Your 11 o'clock canceled. And the bank representatives are here early. Thomas loosened his designer tie, feeling it constrict like a noose. Tell them I'm in a meeting. They said they'll wait. The sleek office that had once symbolized his success now felt like a prison. On his computer screen, email after email delivered bad news. Clients pulling out, partners distancing themselves, rumors spreading through the real estate community. His phone buzzed. Eleanor. Again. He declined the call, remembering their latest fight. She discovered his hidden email account, the one containing correspondence with his various mistresses. Her reaction had been explosive. Mr. Carlton. A stern voice made him look up. The bank representatives had ignored his secretary's stalling tactics. We need to discuss the irregularities in your accounts. In the apartment he shared with Eleanor, the atmosphere was toxic. She paced the living room, her designer clothes now seeming like a costume rather than a sign of success. What do you mean you can't access the accounts? She demanded, her voice rising. You promised me security. Thomas slammed his hand on the marble countertop. Don't talk to me about promises. You're the one who keeps demanding more money. Because you keep gambling it away. Eleanor's voice cracked. What happened to all those real estate deals you bragged about? From his room, Finn listened to their fighting, his expensive headphones failing to block out their voices. The luxury apartment that had seemed so impressive when they first moved and now felt suffocating. Across town, in his construction office, David reviewed the latest reports about Thomas's downfall. His network of contacts kept him informed of each new development. Boss, Mike knocked on his door. You might want to see this. He handed over a business newspaper. The headline announced an investigation into Thomas Carlton's development projects. David read the article with cold satisfaction. His carefully planted doubts about structural integrity had bloomed into a full investigation. The anonymous tips about safety violations had done their work. His phone lit up with a message from Jack, his detective friend. Thomas just tried to access his offshore accounts. They're frozen. He's panicking. Back in Thomas's world, the panic was indeed setting in. His carefully constructed facade was cracking. At a high-end restaurant where he was meeting potential investors, his credit card was declined. There must be some mistake, he said smoothly, but his voice had lost its usual confidence. No mistake, sir, the waiter replied. The card company specifically said to confiscate it. The investors exchanged glances and made their excuses to leave. Thomas sat alone at the table, his empire crumbling around him. Eleanor wasn't faring any better. At her usual salon, the whispers followed her. Her past financial troubles had somehow become public knowledge. Her social circle, once so welcoming, now avoided her calls. I'm sorry, Eleanor, her closest friend said over the phone, but after what I've heard, I just can't be associated with that kind of behavior. The rejection stung, but what hurt more was knowing she deserved it. She'd betrayed David, stolen from him, and for what? A life that was rapidly turning into a nightmare. Finn watched his mother's deterioration with a mix of pity and resentment. The promises of a better life had proven hollow. Instead of the luxury and excitement Thomas had promised, there was only tension and fear. David's phone buzzed again. Another desperate message from Eleanor. He read it without expression. David, please. Things aren't what I thought. We need to talk. He deleted it without responding. His revenge wasn't about quick satisfaction. It was about complete destruction, and it was working perfectly. Thomas's desperation grew by the hour. His gambling habits, once carefully hidden, became reckless. In an underground casino, he bet heavily, trying to recoup his losses. Mr. Carlton, the dealer said after his latest loss, perhaps you should take a break. Just deal the cards, Thomas snarled, but his hands shook as he placed his next bet. The news of his losses spread quickly through David's network. Each piece of information was a weapon, precisely aimed and perfectly timed. Eleanor's attempts to maintain her social status became increasingly desperate. At a charity event she'd once dominated, she found herself ignored, her presence an embarrassment. I heard she stole from her husband. One woman whispered loudly enough for Eleanor to hear. And that's not even the worst of it. David received regular updates about their disintegration. Each report confirmed that his plan was working. Thomas's business was in ruins, Eleanor's social life destroyed, their new life together collapsing under the weight of their own choices. In his office, David reviewed a final report from his private investigator. Thomas's last development project was being shut down completely. The man's reputation in real estate was destroyed beyond repair. What goes around comes around, David muttered, filing the report away. He had no pity for them. They had chosen their path, and now they would walk it to its bitter end. Chapter 8. Confrontation and Clarity. Eleanor stood outside David's house, her expensive clothes now seeming shabby, her confident posture replaced by desperate uncertainty. She had rehearsed this moment, practiced her words, but now they felt hollow. The door opened. David stood there, his expression unreadable. He had known she would come eventually. It was part of his plan. David, her voice cracked. Please, can we talk? He stepped aside, letting her enter. The house hadn't changed, but it felt different now. Colder, more imposing. Or perhaps that was just her guilty conscience. I made a mistake, she began, wringing her hands. Thomas. He's not who I thought he was. David sat at his dining room table, his posture relaxed but radiating power. And who did you think he was, Eleanor? He promised me everything: excitement, luxury, a better life. But it was all lies. She wiped at her tears. The gambling, the affairs, the failed deals. Like your lies. David's voice was quiet but cut like steel. Your theft? Your manipulation? Eleanor flinched. I know I hurt you. Hurt me? David leaned forward. You and Finn didn't just hurt me. You tried to destroy me. Treated me like an ATM machine, remember? His calm demeanor terrified her more than anger would have. She had expected rage, hoped for it even. This cold, controlled response was worse. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'll do anything to make it right. Anything? David's laugh was devoid of humor. Like what, Eleanor? Return the money you stole? Rebuild my trust? Erase Finn's cruel words? Please, David. I have nowhere else to go. Thomas has lost everything. Yes, David nodded. He has. Strange how quickly a man's fortune can disappear when his true nature is exposed. Eleanor's eyes widened as realization dawned. You did this? Did what? David's voice remained neutral. I didn't force Thomas to gamble. Didn't make him cheat on you. Didn't cause his business deals to fail. Those were his choices. Just like betraying me was your choice. Across town, Thomas paced in his increasingly empty office. His phone rang, another creditor demanding payment. His hands shook as he ignored the call. A knock at his door made him jump. Mr. Carlton? The investigators are here. The team of auditors filed in, led by a stern-faced woman with a briefcase full of documents. Mr. Carlton, we have some questions about irregularities in your development projects. Thomas loosened his tie, sweat beading on his forehead. This is ridiculous. My projects are completely legitimate. Really? The investigator opened her briefcase. We have evidence suggesting otherwise. Anonymous sources provided quite detailed documentation. Back at David's house, Eleanor was breaking down. I'll do anything, David. Please, help me fix this. Fix this? David stood, his presence dominating the room. There's nothing to fix, Eleanor. You made your choices. Now you live with them. You're enjoying this, aren't you? Her voice turned accusatory. Watching us suffer? Enjoying it? David's expression remained unchanged. No, I'm observing it. There's a difference. You thought you could use me, discard me, and face no consequences. You were wrong. Eleanor's phone buzzed. Another text from Thomas, demanding she return to the apartment. Their latest fight had ended with him throwing things. He's changed, she whispered. He's not the man I remembered. No, David replied. He's exactly who he always was. You just didn't want to see it. He walked to the door, opening it. The dismissal was clear. David, please. Eleanor made one last attempt. What about Finn? Finn made his choice too. Tell him his room is still here if he wants to learn about honest work instead of easy money. As Eleanor left, David watched her hurry to her car, no longer the confident woman who had left him, but a broken shell of her former self. His phone buzzed. A message from his contact at the building department. Final inspection failed. Carlton's project is officially shut down. Perfect timing. Eleanor would arrive home to find Thomas in an even worse state than she'd left him. David returned to his dining room, where his latest project plans lay spread out. His revenge wasn't complete yet, but it was proceeding exactly as planned. Chapter 9. The New Dawn. The knock at David's door came early one morning. He opened it to find Finn standing there, looking nothing like the arrogant teenager who had left months ago. Can I come in? Finn's voice was uncertain, his designer clothes rumpled. David stepped aside, saying nothing. He had anticipated this moment, had prepared for it, but seeing Finn's defeated posture still stirred something in him. I messed up, Finn said, standing awkwardly in the kitchen where they had once shared breakfast. I was stupid and cruel and... I'm sorry. David leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Sorry for what, exactly? Everything. The note. Calling you an ATM. Following Mom and Thomas. Finn's words tumbled out. They're fighting. It's constant now. Thomas threw a glass at her yesterday. I couldn't stay there anymore. And now you want what? David's voice remained neutral. A place to crash until things blow over? No. Finn looked up, his eyes desperate. I want to learn. From you. About work, about being a man. David studied him carefully. The boy's designer clothes couldn't hide his lost expression, his need for structure. Work starts at 6 a.m., David finally said. Manual labor. No shortcuts. No complaints. Really? Hope crept into Finn's voice. You'll let me stay? On my terms. David's tone brooked no argument. You want to learn about real life? It starts with honest work. The next morning found Finn at the construction site, wearing borrowed work clothes, his soft hands unused to physical labor. Stay with Mike, David instructed. Learn everything he teaches you. Make one mistake with safety protocols and you're done. Mike nodded, understanding David's unstated message. Watch the boy. Test him. See if he's serious. By day's end, Finn's hands were blistered, his muscles aching. But he hadn't complained once. Not bad for your first day, Mike reported to David. Kid's got a lot to learn, but he's trying. David watched from his office as Finn helped clean up the site. The boy's privileged upbringing showed in his awkward handling of tools, but there was a determination in his movements that hadn't been there before. His phone buzzed. Eleanor again. Another plea for help, another description of Thomas's increasingly volatile behavior. David deleted it without reading fully. At home that evening, Finn sat at the kitchen table, carefully applying bandages to his hands. Thomas's latest project failed inspection, he said quietly. Mom's talking about leaving him, but she's scared. He's not handling things well. David continued preparing dinner, his movements precise. Your mother made her choices. I know. Finn stared at his bandaged hands. I never thought it would end up like this. Actions have consequences, David replied, setting a plate in front of him. Something you're learning now. Days turned into weeks. Finn's hands hardened, his understanding of construction work growing. David watched his progress with careful attention, neither praising nor criticizing excessively. The reports about Thomas and Eleanor continued to flow in. Thomas's legal troubles mounted as more irregularities in his business dealings came to light. Eleanor's attempts to rebuild her social connections failed repeatedly. David's revenge had worked perfectly, better than he had planned. Thomas was facing potential criminal charges. Eleanor's reputation was irreparably damaged. And Finn was learning the value of honest work, of facing consequences. One evening, as they reviewed construction plans together, Finn looked up at David. You orchestrated all of it, didn't you? Thomas's downfall, Mom's social isolation. David met his gaze steadily. Would it matter if I did? No, Finn replied after a moment. They deserved it. We deserved it. David nodded slightly, returning to the plans. He had rebuilt his life, not as a victim but as a victor. The coldness inside him remained, a reminder that betrayal carried a price. The construction site stretched out below his office window, a testament to his ability to build and destroy. He had torn down the facades of those who had betrayed him, stripped away their pretenses, and left them to face the consequences of their choices. Eleanor and Thomas's destruction was complete, their arrogance replaced by desperation. And Finn was learning that life's most valuable lessons often came through hard work and honest choices. David stood at his window, watching his crew's work. He had proven himself not just a builder of structures, but a destroyer of those who crossed him. The ruthlessness awakened by betrayal had become part of him now, a cold strength that would ensure no one would ever mistake his kindness for weakness again. Epilogue. 10 years later. David Harding stood at the helm of Harding Construction Group's new headquarters, his company name displayed prominently on the building's facade. At 48, his hair had traces of gray, but his presence commanded even more respect than before. The past decade had transformed his modest construction business into one of the city's premier development companies. The Anderson project numbers look good, Finn reported, setting down a thick folder on David's desk. At 27, Finn had grown into a capable executive, learning the business from the ground up. His hands, once soft from privilege, now bore the same calluses as David's, earned through years of practical experience. Walk me through the safety protocols, David instructed, his standards as exacting as ever. Finn detailed the procedures with practiced efficiency. He had earned his position the hard way, starting as a basic laborer and working through ranks. The lessons from 10 years ago had shaped him into a different man. Mike wants your input on the new training program, Finn added. Mike had been promoted to safety director 5 years ago, his loyalty and competence rewarded. David nodded, reviewing the proposals. His management style hadn't changed. He remained demanding, precise, and unforgiving of mistakes. The ruthlessness awakened by Eleanor's betrayal had become a cornerstone of his business philosophy. Sir, his secretary interrupted via intercom. There's a news article you should see. David pulled up the local business website. The headline read, "Former real estate mogul Thomas Carlton released from prison. Have you seen this?" he asked Finn. Yeah. Finn's expression hardened. 5 years for fraud and embezzlement. Got out early for good behavior. David had tracked Thomas's downfall with cold satisfaction. After the collapse of his real estate empire, Thomas had turned to increasingly desperate schemes, eventually crossing legal lines that even his expensive lawyers couldn't defend. He tried writing to me in prison, Finn mentioned. I never responded. David's network of contacts, now extensive and deeply embedded in the city's business community, had kept him informed of Thomas's attempts to rebuild his life during incarceration. Each attempt had been quietly thwarted. And Eleanor? David asked, though he already knew the answer. Still in Phoenix, Finn replied. Working as a real estate agent for a small firm. She sends birthday cards sometimes. I return them unopened. Eleanor's fall from grace had been complete. After Thomas's arrest, she had fled the city, her reputation in tatters. Attempts to rebuild her social standing in other cities had failed. David's influence had grown beyond their hometown. Randall called. Finn continued, changing the subject. The Mitchell merger is ready to proceed. Randall, the lawyer who had helped orchestrate David's revenge, was now Harding Construction Group's chief legal counsel. His unorthodox approaches had helped the company navigate complex deals and acquisitions. David's phone buzzed, a text from Jack, the detective who had become a trusted friend. Carlton spotted at Pete's bar. Looking rough. Your old friend is back in town. David showed Finn the message. He's not my problem, Finn replied firmly. Neither of them are. The lesson had been thoroughly learned. Finn had embraced David's philosophy of hard work and loyalty, distancing himself completely from his mother's materialistic values. David's revenge had evolved into something more permanent than mere destruction. He had built an empire on the ruins of his old life, transforming betrayal into success. The construction site visible from his office window hummed with activity. His crews, now numbering in the hundreds, worked with the same precision he had always demanded. The company's reputation for excellence was legendary, its contracts prestigious. The Thompson bid needs your review. Finn laid another folder on the desk. They're worried about the timeline. They should be more worried about quality, David replied. His standards hadn't softened with success. A notification popped up on David's computer, a report from one of his contacts. Thomas had been seen applying for jobs at several small real estate firms. Each application would mysteriously fall through. Did you hear about Mom's latest attempt? Finn asked, his tone distant. She tried connecting with some of her old social circle on social media. How did that go? About as well as you'd expect. Your influence runs deep. David had made sure of that. His company's success had brought power and connections. The same people who had once embraced Eleanor now shunned her completely. Mr. Harding, his secretary buzzed again. Your 4 o'clock is here. The City Planning Commission. David and Finn exchanged knowing looks. The commission that had once investigated Thomas's projects now sought Harding Construction Group's expertise on major developments. Life has a way of coming full circle, David commented. The afternoon proceeded with meetings and project reviews. David's management style remained hands-on, his attention to detail undiminished. Success hadn't made him soft. If anything, it had reinforced his ruthless approach to business. Later that evening, David and Finn reviewed plans for a new development. Ironically, on the same site where Thomas's failed project had once stood. Remember when he promised me a life of luxury? Finn said, studying the blueprints. Funny how things work out. You earned this life, David replied. That's the difference. Their relationship had evolved over the decade. The initial mentor-student dynamic had grown into a partnership based on mutual respect and shared values. David's phone lit up with another message from Jack. Eleanor tried opening a real estate office back in town. Lease mysteriously fell through. Still keeping tabs? Finn asked, seeing David's slight smile. Always, David replied. His network continued to monitor those who had betrayed him, ensuring their attempts at resurrection failed. The sun was setting over the city skyline, glinting off the glass towers that housed David's growing empire. He had transformed from a simple construction foreman into a powerful business leader, his influence extending far beyond building sites. Mike mentioned Thomas tried applying for a site manager position at Callahan Construction, Finn said. They called us for a reference. What did we say? Nothing. That was enough. David nodded approvingly. The lesson he had taught his betrayers continued. Actions had consequences, and those consequences could last a lifetime. His secretary entered with the evening reports. Among them was a social page featuring Eleanor at a small real estate open house in Phoenix. The contrast between her current life and her former aspirations was stark. She's trying to rebuild, Finn observed, his voice neutral. Some things can't be rebuilt, David replied. The coldness in his voice hadn't diminished over the years. The evening wound down with final project reviews. David's work ethic remained as strong as ever, his standards uncompromising. Success had only reinforced his belief in control and consequences. Dinner at your place tonight? Finn asked as they prepared to leave. Sarah's making that pasta you like. David agreed. His relationship with Finn had expanded to include Finn's wife, Sarah, a construction engineer who had earned David's respect through her own merit. At home later that night, watching Finn and Sarah discuss their latest project, David reflected on the decade's changes. His revenge had evolved into something more profound than destruction. It had become a legacy. The doorbell rang. Sarah answered it, returning with a registered letter. Inside was a note from Thomas, written in prison stationery. David, I know it was you. All of it. I understand now what I lost, what I destroyed. Not asking for forgiveness. Just acknowledging the truth. David read the letter twice, then fed it into his shredder without comment. The admission changed nothing. His revenge had never been about acknowledgement. It had been about consequences. Everything okay? Finn asked, noticing David's expression. Perfect, David replied, and meant it. He had built something stronger than revenge. A dynasty founded on the principles that had guided him. Hard work, loyalty, and the understanding that betrayal carried a price. The city lights twinkled beyond his windows. Somewhere out there, Thomas was trying to rebuild a life from prison's ashes. Eleanor was showing modest homes to modest clients in Phoenix. Their grand dreams had crumbled, while David's empire had risen. His phone buzzed one final time that night. Another update from his network. Thomas had been turned down for another job. Eleanor had lost another potential client. The wheels David had set in motion a decade ago continued to turn. Next week's board meeting, Finn reminded him as they finished dinner. We're announcing the expansion. David nodded. Harding Construction Group was about to become regional, spreading into neighboring states. His influence would grow, his power increase. The betrayal that had awakened his ruthless side had led to this. Not just revenge, but renaissance. He had rebuilt himself into someone stronger, colder, more powerful than before. As Finn and Sarah left for the night, David stood at his window, master of the empire he had built from betrayal's ashes. The coldness inside him remained, a reminder and a weapon. He had learned and taught a vital lesson. Cross David Harding, and the consequences would echo through decades. The city stretched before him, full of opportunities and potential conquests. His revenge had transformed into something greater, a legacy of power built on the understanding that every action had consequences, and some debts could never be repaid. David Harding, once a simple construction foreman, now stood as a testament to what betrayal could create, not just destruction, but a new kind of strength, cold and unforgiving as steel. The future stretched before him, full of possibilities, all built on the foundation of a revenge served not just cold, but eternal. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.